If I ask you to make a video essay about the animated shows that have been going on for the longest period of time, you may talk about The Simpsons. You might also mention Family Guy, but one show you will definitely talk about is SpongeBob, one of the biggest kid shows and shows in general. It's been going since 1999 and doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon, even if TV isn't the same as it used to be back then. But before all of the video games, the books, the 50 movies, and 100 seasons was one season. Season 1, if you will. And today, I am going to be reviewing every single episode of SpongeBob Season 1 and saying if I think each episode is either good, bad, or mid. Beginning with Help Wanted. This episode had a big mission. Somehow it had to introduce people to the odd and wacky universe that SpongeBob takes place in, a show about a kitchen sponge that lives underwater inside a pineapple and works at a lobster trap, which is a fast food restaurant. So the first thing Help Wanted does is introduce us to the sponge himself. And how SpongeBob is introduced in this episode tells us everything we need to know about the character. He's a silly, childlike, and kinda geeky dude, but he also has ambitions to get a job as a fry cook, which he takes very seriously, and that's basically the joke. No one actually aspires to work at a fast food place, but SpongeBob says he's been training his entire life to get this job. This is something he's been dreaming of, and we see how, when he tries to, Mr. Krabs doesn't actually want to hire him, and sends him on a task to go to a grocery store to get a special type of spatula that he basically just made up. But in wild, cartoony fashion, it just so happens that the grocery store does actually have that type of spatula, and SpongeBob ends up getting the job when he saves the Krusty Krab from a bunch of hungry anchovies. The scene where SpongeBob makes Krabby Patties in the kitchen for the first time is animated very well, and I love some of the backgrounds and the music that plays during this scene. The entire episode actually has amazing visuals. Season 1 of SpongeBob was made using traditional hand-drawn animation with actual cells, and because of that, every episode in Season 1, including Help Wanted, has very charming animation and visuals. This episode is also very funny. Okay, so on a scale of good, bad, and mid, I would definitely give it a good. Reef Blower. Unlike most episodes that are about 11 or 12 minutes long, this one was the first episode of SpongeBob to only be a few minutes long. Not even. 2 minutes and 50 seconds. This episode is basically about SpongeBob trying to use a reef blower to clean up his front yard of sand, and annoying Squidward in the process. Something interesting about this episode is that it doesn't have any spoken dialogue, kinda like those old Roadrunner and Coyote shorts. The most important thing about an episode like this, which has no dialogue, is the music, sound effects, and animation. And all of those things were done very well in this episode. There are some decent sound effects used here that get the point across, like this one moment where Squidward doesn't have any water to breathe, and he makes a gulping sound, which gets the point across. This episode has some pretty good visual gags too. I think the most notable one is when SpongeBob accidentally sucks up all the water in the ocean. There's also a moment in this episode where SpongeBob says "you," but because this episode doesn't have any spoken dialogue, the word "you" appears on the screen, like what would happen whenever characters would go to say something in old silent picture films like Nosferatu. Overall, this is a good episode. Tea at the Treedome. This episode was a debut of many things. Jellyfish fields, SpongeBob going jellyfishing, But most notably, this is the episode that was the debut of Sandy Cheeks, a main character in SpongeBob who would go on to become a big part of the show. In this episode, we see SpongeBob meet Sandy and they become friends after SpongeBob tries to save Sandy from a clam, but then ends up getting saved by Sandy. After Sandy invites him to have tea at the Treedome, SpongeBob actually goes to Patrick for advice on how to make a good impression, which is a moment that shows how, despite Patrick being an idiot, SpongeBob thinks that his ideas are good ideas, something Tom Kenny talked about once in the behind-the-scenes video on a SpongeBob DVD. When he gets to the Treedome, SpongeBob finds out that there's no water inside, but he acts like it isn't a big deal because he wants to impress his new friend, despite him being a sea animal and needing water to live. And it's actually a pretty compelling story about SpongeBob putting so much effort into basically not being true to himself, despite this not even being a big deal in the end when Sandy does find out that he can't survive without water. I also liked when SpongeBob and Patrick tried to drink tea while wearing water helmets. It was a very quick moment, but a funny visual gag. This is definitely a good episode. Bubblestand. I'm just gonna get straight to the point. This episode is a classic. It's basically about SpongeBob starting Bubblestand, which in and of itself is a funny concept. And Patrick also gets involved, and he's pretty funny in this episode. The best part of this episode, though, is Squidward being so indifferent and grumpy about SpongeBob and Patrick's bubble antics. And it's funny how Squidward says, who would pay 25 cents to blow a bubble? Because he then spends a good amount of the episode basically emptying an entire pocket of change on blowing bubbles. I love episodes where Squidward gets in on the fun and gets carried away, and he does get kind of carried away in this episode, both literally and figuratively. This is a good episode. Also, I love how the sky looks in this frame. The show has such amazing backgrounds. Ripped pants. This episode is the debut of Goo Lagoon and Larry the Lobster, and we see some funny visual gags in the beginning, with SpongeBob playing in the sand and doing an impression of Squidward. Not the last time we'd see SpongeBob doing impressions of other characters. The comedy in this episode as a whole is pretty decent. What I love most about this episode, though, is the message. See, SpongeBob ends up ripping his pants by accident and everyone finds it funny, so he spends the entire episode intentionally ripping his pants, trying to make everyone laugh again and again and again. Essentially, he becomes a walking meme, a parody of himself. And like every meme, this new version of himself does get old and stops being funny after only a small amount of time. SpongeBob kills the joke and annoys everyone, trying to capture lightning in a bottle again. Because it was funny the first time, of course it would be funny the 50th time. Eventually, SpongeBob takes it too far and loses all his friends. But not just his friends, he also lost himself, trying to get attention by being just the ripped pants guy. And it's when he goes back to being himself that Sandy and everyone else come back to him. And so that song is awesome. You shouldn't take yourself too seriously, and it's okay to be kind of a silly guy, but you should never forget that you are more than just a walking meme. And that is the message of the SpongeBob episode, Ripped Pants. I think it's obvious what I think of it, but this is a good episode. Jellyfishing. As some of you probably know, during the post-movie era of SpongeBob, where we started getting a lot of bad episodes, one type of bad episode that many people started picking up on were ones where Squidward basically gets crapped on by the entire universe just for existing, to such an extent that it failed at being funny. And before checking it out again for this video, I didn't remember liking this episode, because I remembered thinking that this was basically like the first one of those episodes. But after giving it another watch, I was actually surprised. This episode is a lot better than I remember it being. It's basically about Squidward getting pretty badly injured, and when he gets home, SpongeBob and Patrick try to make it so he has the best best day ever. One of the main things that set this episode apart from other infamously bad Squidward Tocho episodes is that this episode is actually funny. Very funny. And although they were being an absolute nuisance to Squidward, this episode gives you the feeling that SpongeBob and Patrick are just genuinely trying to brighten up his day. But even if that wasn't the case, it's not like Squidward doesn't have his own little moments near the end of this episode, where he basically gets back at them for how much they annoyed him. I also love the opening to this episode, with Patrick and SpongeBob getting their jellyfishing nets, as epic music plays. And of course, you've also got that iconic Patrick moment in this episode. This is a good episode. Plankton. You can already tell by the title card music that this is gonna be a good episode. This episode as a whole has great background music. This was the very first episode of SpongeBob that Plankton appeared in. It was the debut of the main villain in the show. And did it do a good job introducing this iconic cartoon villain? Absolutely. This episode tells you everything you need to know about Plankton, how he is enemies with Mr. Krabs, and like Doofenshmirtz, he's not a super serious, threatening villain like Slade in the original Teen Titans. His motives can essentially be summed up as him wanting to steal the formula for a sandwich. And so that's one of the best things about the character, how he'll do anything to get this formula. He's always coming up with a new scheme and plan to do so. Like in this episode, he takes control of SpongeBob's brain and tries to use SpongeBob's body to steal a Krabby Patty. Also, I love Squidward's reaction to SpongeBob waking through his walls in the middle of the night while he's trying to sleep, and then insulting him and walking away while laughing like a maniac. He doesn't know what to think, and then he just goes back to bed. This episode also has that legendary gag where Plankton says, "This is my lab," and then there's a video of a dog. Like I said, this is a good episode. Naughty Nautical Neighbors. This honestly isn't one of my favorite season 1 episodes. It just isn't as memorable to me as most of the other ones. But what I will say is it does do enough to make itself different from many other Squidward episodes. Because instead of it being an episode where Squidward is just trying to live his life and mind his own business, but everything is constantly happening to annoy him, he's actually basically a villain in this episode, which is entertaining and does make for a pretty good episode. Boarding School. This is the episode that introduces us to Mrs. Puff, SpongeBob's boarding instructor, a character who'd come back in so many episodes. And what I'll say off the bat is that this episode does a very good job at setting up who Mrs. Puff is, why she hates being SpongeBob's boarding instructor, and just how bad SpongeBob is at driving. Always crashing the boat, making Mrs. Puff, well, puff up. It was an interesting detail how seemingly SpongeBob actually knows how to drive, as he easily passed the written test, but he just has terrible anxiety once he gets behind the wheel. It was also interesting how Patrick was actually pretty competent in this episode, as he gave SpongeBob the perfect instructions during the driving test, and thanks to Patrick, SpongeBob would have passed, at least if he didn't freak out about how he was cheating. I also found it funny how, while SpongeBob was taking his test, Patrick was shown trying on SpongeBob's pants, reading his diary, and going through SpongeBob's fridge. This is a good episode. Also, apparently SpongeBob saying 1924 as an answer was a reference to a British submarine L-24. I don't know what to do with that information. Pizza delivery. In this episode, SpongeBob and Squidward have to deliver a pizza for the Krusty Krab. And I love this episode. It's very funny. It's funny from beginning to end. It always gets me how when Mr. Krabs is talking to the customer on the phone, he calls Squidward the Krusty Krab's delivery squid, because it implies every restaurant in Bikini Bottom has a delivery squid. Though I do need to make a correction. According to Steven Hillenburg, Squidward is actually an octopus, despite his name. That's a minor thing though, not a big plot in this episode. This is the episode that has that iconic and funny Krusty Krab pizza song. And this is basically an episode where SpongeBob and Squidward go on this great big journey to deliver the pizza. And despite a lot happening to get in the way of their mission, including literally a tornado, SpongeBob does not give up because he's determined to get the pizza to the customer. Even though Squidward, on the other hand, wants to call it quits. Eventually, they finally get to the customer's house, and we see how innocently excited SpongeBob is to see the customer's reaction to the pizza. And this is the best part of this episode, an incredible climax. Because despite all of SpongeBob's effort to deliver the pizza to him, the customer yells in his face and insults him. Squidward sees how instantly SpongeBob's innocent joy and passion for his job is completely stomped on, and it makes him so angry he goes over to the customer and stands up for SpongeBob. This is a side of Squidward we hardly ever see, as he is usually just constantly annoyed by SpongeBob, but this is a perfect way to end the episode. And with all of the other awesome ones out there, like Band Geeks, I don't know if I would say this is the best Squidward episode, but it's definitely up there, and absolutely one of my favorite Squidward episodes. Enough said. This is a good episode. Home Sweet Pineapple. This is the episode where SpongeBob had to move, but in a fashion not too different from the scene in the SpongeBob movie where he and Patrick come back to life. The conflict in this episode is solved, and SpongeBob doesn't actually end up having to move. And yeah, throughout the episode, you don't actually think SpongeBob is gonna have to move. I think it's obvious there won't actually be that big of a status quo change in this type of show, but SpongeBob having to move out of his house because of nematodes is a good episode concept, and it was very fun and funny seeing him try to live with Patrick, as we then get that hilarious and iconic scene of Patrick yelling about spiders in the middle of the night and basically attacking SpongeBob. Even though we already know how it's gonna end and SpongeBob isn't gonna have to move, the conclusion to this episode is very fun to get to. This is a good episode. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. This episode introduces us to a couple of mainstay characters in the series. Two characters who are pretty interesting because they're basically parodies of not two, but full superheroes. They are parodies of Aquaman and Aqualad in terms of superpowers and costume design, but also a parody of Batman and Robin with stuff such as words like POW appearing on the screen, like in the 1966 Batman show. This episode is about SpongeBob and Patrick trying to get them out of retirement, and it's a pretty good introduction, and a very funny one, being an episode with many awesome jokes, including the iconic evil! This entire episode is iconic. And man, Onis Borgnine and Tim Conway were amazing as Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. This is a good episode. Pickles. Now this is another iconic episode. This is basically the episode where SpongeBob forgets how to make Krabby Patties and forgets how to basically do anything in general. This is also the first episode to have Bubble Bass as a main character, who wouldn't become part of the main cast of characters until post-movie SpongeBob, but in my opinion, this is his best episode. I love the climax where Bubble Bass and SpongeBob basically have a sheriff, this town ain't big enough for the two of us type showdown, and I love how the Pickles were under his tongue the entire time. This is a good episode. Hall Monitor. You know, one of my favorite moments in this episode is when a couple cops show up and Patrick is being stupid, and then the cops just begin messing with him for no reason at all, just because they find his stupidity funny. And I do too. Patrick is pretty great in this episode, and so is SpongeBob, who we see given a title basically the same as a policeman. And yes, it leads to exactly what you think SpongeBob becoming a cop would lead to. Complete chaos. Yeah, this is a good episode. Jellyfish Jam. This episode is, well, an absolute jam. It's about SpongeBob taking a jellyfish home with him from jellyfish fields and making him his pet, but soon finding out for himself that some wildlife are too wild to become pets. This episode is the complete opposite of slow and uninteresting. Once it gets moving, it stays moving. moving. It is very fast-paced, a lot happens in it. There's a lot of very funny gags, like the potty trains one, and when the jellyfish break Squidward's clarinet in half and begin dancing around it, Kumbaya style. I love the song at the end of the episode, without the ocean sound effects and everything. It's a very feel-good ending. And speaking of music, I just love how music is used in this episode in general. The song that plays during the scene where all the jellyfish are in SpongeBob's house is apparently an original SpongeBob song, but it sounds very similar to the song Get Ready For This by 2 Unlimited, which I often hear playing over the speakers at a grocery store, and whenever I do, I think of this episode, which in my opinion just shows how iconic and memorable it is. This is a good episode. Sandy's Rockets. In this episode, SpongeBob and Patrick sneak into a spaceship that Sandy built, and put it simply, cause havoc. The comedy in this episode is its biggest strength. Patrick was really funny with the stuff he said, like his I like rockets comments, SpongeBob asking him if he got him a present, and Patrick just saying no. And the other characters are funny too. I laughed when Mr. Krabs said, okay, shoot me, but don't take me money. SpongeBob and Patrick calling Squidward ugly and disgusting while he was trying to sleep. Then there's the irony of SpongeBob and Patrick leaving Bikini Bottom, thinking they're leaving the moon, and having everyone from Bikini Bottom bagged up in the space rockets because they think they're aliens. And SpongeBob saying he can't wait to see the look on Sandy's face, who, of course, is in the rocket too. This is a good episode. Squeaky Boots. Many people seem to like this episode, but I consider it the worst of season 1. This episode actually has a pretty good opening. I like the scene where Mr. Krabs is throwing a birthday party for Pearl, and I thought it was funny when Mr. Krabs tried to make her less mad at him for buying her boots instead of the slippers she wanted by saying he got it for a bargain. But after this scene, the episode becomes very irritating. Mr. Krabs gives the boots to SpongeBob because he just has to figure out something to do with them. He spent $2 whole on them. Convinced they were once worn by a famous fry cook, SpongeBob starts wearing the boots everywhere he goes, and every time he walks, they make an excruciating squeaky noise. He annoys Squidward with the boots at the Krusty Krab, and I think Squidward speaks for the audience when he says, that squeaking is gonna drive us all crazy. Mr. Krabs goes home and hears a squeaky noise while he's trying to sleep, and he breaks his leg, which I admit did make me laugh a little. The next morning, Mr. Krabs returns to the Krusty Krab, and SpongeBob is there, still wearing the boots, and the squeaking continues over and over again, non-stop, to the point of complete annoyance. I do like the visual at the end of the episode though. The visuals are not something I have a problem with in this episode. I also don't think the story is bad either. None of the characters are acting out of character. There are some funny jokes. And something interesting about this episode is that it references Edgar Allan Poe's famous story, The Telltale House, when Mr. Krabs says, the squeaking of the hideous boots, which is a reference to the quote from The Telltale House, the beating of the hideous house. Really, the only bad thing about this episode is the sound effects that they use for the boots. But that is a big problem. When doing a story about something annoying the characters in the story, it's important that whatever it is doesn't actually annoy the viewers watching the episode, because when you have a grating sound effects played during the entire episode, when someone is trying to watch it, it ruins the positives about the episode, which is why, in my opinion, this is a bad episode. Nature Pants. In this episode, SpongeBob decides to go off the grid to hide from the iOS. No, I'm kidding. That would be a good episode though, wouldn't it? This episode has some funny moments, like Patrick going crazy, and also at the beginning of the episode where there's a fire at the Krusty Krab, and, well, I'm not gonna spoil what SpongeBob does because it would ruin the joke, but then the way Mr. Krabs looks at him, great comedy. But honestly, I'm not a big fan of this episode. I mean, it isn't insultingly bad or anything, but it has no actual conflicts, or even that coherent of a story. SpongeBob decides to try to become a jellyfish, and then, of course, it doesn't go well and he ends up going back to his old life. But why would SpongeBob, a character who is often defined by how much he loves his job and his life, just randomly decide he wants to live with the wild? And that's exactly what it is. It's random. And it's not like he has anything to gain from leaving behind behind the Krusty Krab, Patrick, Gary, etc. to run around in Jellyfish Fields naked. If this was a Patrick episode, like Pat the host, it would be more in character, but even putting aside character motives, the story is just character decides he wants to try something, people tell him it won't last, he tries it, and it doesn't. Yeah, there are a lot of entertaining moments and gags in this episode, but by the end of the episode, it feels like nothing actually happened. This is a mid-episode. Opposite day. This episode is about Squidward convincing SpongeBob that it's opposite day, so that he won't act like his usual energetic and loud self. That way Squidward can try to sell his house. This is the type of episode that has a concept and does everything it possibly can with it. I love all the gags they get out of it. Gary making a dog noise. SpongeBob and Patrick going to use bubble wands and then just becoming bubbles themselves. All of them. There's a ton of awesome gags in this episode. And it's the climax of this episode, when the lady from the moving agency is at Squidward's house and you've got everyone showing up as Squidward, SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward himself, and even Gary. That scene had me cracking up. Though there was one bit in this episode that I don't understand. There was a gag where the sound of SpongeBob and Patrick talking is being played backwards, so I played it forward to see if I could decipher what they were saying, and I've got nothing.
To get to the opposite side! I give up! Hey, Patrick!
Like, what? What? Anyways, this is definitely a good episode. Though I guess you could say it is a terrible episode. Definitely one of the worst episodes of the show. On opposite day, that is. Culture shock. This is the episode about the Krusty Krab holding a talent show, not to be confused with the one about the Krusty Krab having a play. In this episode, we see Squidward basically nominate himself to host the talent show, and there are two aspects of this episode that are the main focus of its comedy. Squidward trying to host the talent show, while SpongeBob also keeps bugging him, and the talent show itself. The funniest part, in my opinion, was the poetry with Gary, and also Sandy's reaction to it being completely in awe. You could also probably make an essay semi-overanalyzing the significance of the crowd cheering SpongeBob when he mops, but when Squidward gets on the stage and mops, it's different. That's because he's trying too hard, when often talent is something that comes natural. That is if you wanted to overanalyze it. I also thought it was funny when Mr. Krabs introduced himself in this episode by saying, "Hello, I'm Mr. Krabs. I like money." This is a good episode. Fun. This episode is very fun. Heh, see what I did there? Never mind. This is also the first episode to try to tell a story where you think Plankton might be turning a new leaf, but it turns out, no he isn't. There have been multiple episodes following this one to try a similar premise. I think this one does it best though, along with it being the first one, thus making this episode be when this concept was the most fresh. It also does genuinely seem for a second that Plankton is actually enjoying his friendship with SpongeBob, as even Karen pointed out that he's kind of forgetting the mission. There's also the fun song, which is an instant classic. And along with being a funny little tune, it also shows the contrast between SpongeBob and Plankton's outlook with how they define fun. SpongeBob's definition being very innocent and lighthearted, and Plankton's being, well, evil. This is a good episode. MuscleBob BuffPants. In this episode, SpongeBob wants to impress people by getting buff. But instead of actually going to a gym or something, he buys fake muscles he sees on a TV commercial. And when people see his new look, everyone is impressed and he becomes very popular, getting a ton of people cheering him on and asking him what they can do to get like him. Even Larry the Lobster is impressed. But eventually people find out about SpongeBob's lie, and this episode is actually pretty topical, with how a lot of actual athletes and bodybuilders in reality just got really out by taking steroids. And when people find out about that, it's a pretty big deal, because of course it is. It's basically cheating. Oh, and the comedy in the episode is also pretty good. I thought it was funny how this episode basically implies SpongeBob is too weak to even lift a glass cup. This is a good episode. Squidward's the Unfriendly Ghost. In this episode, Squidward dies. Well, not actually. But SpongeBob and Patrick think Squidward is now a ghost, and Squidward uses that as a way to make them do whatever he says. Squidward is very selfish in this episode, but that's good because it makes the ending not feel too mean, because it's basically him getting what he deserves. This episode has one of my favorite SpongeBob quotes. Patrick says, "I know all about head injuries, believe me." In fact, every single line and joke in this episode is perfect. You've got this gag.
Okay, get in.
Squidward saying, "SpongeBob, are you trying to put me in the nut house?" And SpongeBob saying, "No, just into this hole." Everyone showing up at Squidward's house all sad because they think he passed away. This is easily one of the funniest episodes of SpongeBob. Yeah, this is a good episode. The Chaperone. Oh boy, this is the episode where Mr. Krabs has SpongeBob go with his daughter to a prom. And what I will say is this episode has a ton of good comedic scenes. Like when SpongeBob trying to dance basically sets off a domino effect of destruction at the prom, and the entire SpongeBob having a lifelike dummy thing. It's also neat seeing Mr. Krabs trying to find a solution to a problem, not for money, but for his daughter. However, this is also the episode that nowadays gets brought up as being the one where SpongeBob goes on a date with a high schooler. And unfortunately, I do have to agree that the implication of that is undeniable, especially when you look at it with the hindsight of a modern perspective. And now, I am going to be going on a tangent about these unfortunate implications. In the season 4 episode, Whale of a Birthday, Paul has her 16th birthday, which means if we assume SpongeBob has a chronological timeline where each episode takes place after the previous one, in this episode, she can only be at most 15 years old. Dang, SpongeBob is taking a page out of Cosmodo's book. But if we assume SpongeBob doesn't have a chronological timeline, it's possible that this one takes place after the episode Whale of a Birthday, and if that's the case, it's possible she's in 12th grade, and so therefore at least either 17 or 18 years old, which is still a very gross and strange age for a character who is most likely canonically an adult, like SpongeBob, to take to a prom, if you actually think about it. But I don't think you are supposed to think about it. I don't even think the people who made this episode thought about it. The show doesn't even actually have continuity, as people who make the show have said multiple times over the years. That's probably why we don't know how old SpongeBob is. I don't think they can even make up their mind on an official canonical age for SpongeBob. We did get that fake license in Sleepy Time, which had a date of birth on it, but even that is not something that we can use to do the math and find out how old SpongeBob is, because that episode came out in 1999, but the show doesn't specifically take place in 1999, and so the flow of time in the show does not coincide with the flow of time in real life, which we know because in the season 16 special that came out over 20 years in the future, SpongeBob and Patrick's timeline twist up, when Squidina goes back in time to season 1, she mentions that she is only from a few years into the future. Despite this lack of continuity, even though this is a very entertaining and funny episode, I have to say this is a bad episode, just because of those awful implications. Employee of the Month. In this episode, SpongeBob and Squidward compete against each other to see who will win Employee of the Month. And this isn't the only episode where we see Squidward actually compete for something, but I feel like they should make more episodes like this, because it's actually always a blast whenever we get to see the character who usually wants nothing to do with anything actually try to win at something. And this episode also has so many awesome gags, including the ending where SpongeBob and Squidward both go completely insane. This is a good episode. Scaredy Pants. This was the first of many SpongeBob Halloween episodes, and I have to say, off the bat, this episode has such an awesome atmosphere. It looks fantastic. Almost as fantastic as the stop-motion Halloween special that they made many years later, but that's a review for a different video. This episode has a simple but effective story. See, in this episode, SpongeBob has a reputation for getting very easily scared around this time of year. But this Halloween, he wants to be the one scaring everyone else. So with Patrick's help, he goes around town as a ghost known as the Flying Dutchman, who would actually go on to appear in many other episodes. And SpongeBob ends up insulting him at the Krusty Krab, and the Flying Dutchman shows up to get his revenge against everyone dressing up as him for Halloween. It does actually feel like a lot happens in this episode, and it definitely doesn't have any dull moments. It's a very good episode that has many fun moments and a funny payoff at the end of the episode, which I won't spoil in case any of you haven't seen it, but it's the perfect ending to this episode. Now, unlike some of the future Halloween episodes, which would eventually come out, this one wasn't an actual special length episode. It was about as long as every other episode of SpongeBob. Instead, it was followed up by another kinda spooky themed episode, one that I'm honestly not a big fan of. I Was a Teenage Gary. This is the episode where Squidward is supposed to pet sit Gary, and then SpongeBob and Squidward mutate into snails. It's basically kind of a body horror episode, which is half the reason I don't like it. I just don't really like body horror stuff. I find it unpleasant. And I especially don't like how there was no resolution at the end of this episode. It's like, well, now these characters are just basically stuck like that. Oh well. And yeah, SpongeBob is an episodic show, so it won't continue on into the next episode, but the ending is just kind of a mood kill. I also dislike how Squidward neglects Gary in this episode, and the poor little guy doesn't even get fed for 3 days. But hey, I guess that's just the animal lover in me talking. Yup, this is a bad episode. SB129. This is the episode involving Squidward time traveling, and I absolutely love this episode. It has a perfect setup. How Squidward doesn't just stumble upon a time machine or something like that. He hides from SpongeBob and Patrick in the Krusty Krab, ends up getting locked in the freezer, basically getting cryogenically frozen, and doesn't escape from the freezer until 2,000 years in the future. And the whole everything is chrome in the future thing is both funny and also kind of unsettling, especially when you think about it for more than a minute. Imagine living in a timeline where literally everything is just one color. That would probably drive you crazy. It would be like getting thrown in a white padded room. Trust me, I would know. And then when Squidward travels back in time, the atmosphere is amazing. From the drawings to the sound design, awesome stuff. My favorite thing about this episode though, is how much it comes full circle. When Squidward breaks the time machine and gets sent to this empty void, seemingly outside of time itself, he finally does get everything he wanted, peace and quiet. But it's too much peace and too quiet, and he almost immediately begins panicking and says he misses his home, and he even misses SpongeBob. There's also the fantastic irony of how Squidward, at the beginning of the episode, is trying to hide from SpongeBob and Patrick because they want him to go jellyfishing. And then when he travels back in time, he ends up accidentally becoming the one who invented jellyfishing. And that type of book-ended storytelling just shows how much actual thought was put into this episode, which is why this is definitely a good episode. Karate choppers. One of the most common criticisms people have thrown at post-movie SpongeBob over the years is how many characters had seemingly been flanderized, as in the act of simplifying characters who once had a variety of character traits into characters that basically just have one. An example being how many people believe Sandy got flanderized in post-movie SpongeBob as just being the scientist character, and often the adult in the room, while episodes of classic SpongeBob, such as this one, focus on some of Sandy's other character traits. This one, in specific, focusing on Sandy's karate hobby, as Sandy and SpongeBob are shown to be so addicted to karate that not only do they do it non-stop, but they also become paranoid that a karate battle is constantly about to break out. This causes trouble for SpongeBob at his job, and Mr. Krabs tells him he has to give up doing karate or else he's fired. There are so many funny jokes in this episode, such as Mr. Krabs saying, "Are you on some new allergy medicine, boy?" And Sandy saying she wants karate on a sandwich. And I love how the solution in the episode was SpongeBob and Sandy using karate to make Krabby Patties at the Krusty Krab. This is a good episode. Sleepy time. The idea of anything being perfect may be an oxymoron. Everything made by us humans and not some higher power is destined to have at least some flaws in it. But if this is not a perfect episode, then I don't know what anything is. Sleepy Time has always been one of my absolute favorite episodes of the entire show. And after watching it again for this video, I somehow love it even more. First off, I love the atmosphere and vibe this episode has. It gives off such a chill, dreamy-like late-night vibe, which is very fitting as in this episode, SpongeBob goes around inviting himself into all of his friends' dreams and basically messes everything up in their dreams. I love how each dream is a very fitting reflection of the characters and who they are. SpongeBob dreams about finally getting his license. Mr. Krabs dreams about being on a ship out in an ocean, you know, under the ocean, and catching a giant dollar bill. Squidward getting to play music in front of a king. Patrick's dream, of course, being something so stupid and unimaginative, which is very fitting for a character who just eats and sleeps all day. He doesn't do anything in his waking life, and so he doesn't in his dreams either. An amazing aspect of this episode that shows how much thought went into making it is how not only is it a pretty funny episode, but little details and jokes that show up in it eventually come back in a very seamless way that doesn't feel repetitive, but it's just the episode building off of itself and everything it sets up. I like how the intelligent version of Gary who SpongeBob meets in Gary's iconic and very memorable dream tells SpongeBob a tale about a man who ended up eating his shoe. That was already a pretty funny moment, but then it comes back again as SpongeBob ends up telling the same story to the king in Squidward's dream. And in his own dream, when SpongeBob is looking at his driving license, he mentions how he thinks he should have grown a mustache. And then in Mr. Krabs' dream, when he sees Mr. Krabs' license, Mr. Krabs did have a mustache, which SpongeBob then compliments. These are just very small details that the episode would have been just as amazing without, but the fact that they are even in here shows the exact type of thoughtfulness and creativity that made the episode what it is, which just so happens to be what I love most about this episode. SpongeBob in it of itself as a concept is wicked creative. I mean, a sponge who lives in a pineapple under the ocean and is a fry cook, to come up with a TV show where that is the concept, you'd have to be either very creative or snacking on some crazy brownies. And this is an episode that is massively creative in such a way that I feel like it perfectly captures the essence of what makes SpongeBob the show that it is. And I think that shows in how this episode seems to have inspired aspects of multiple SpongeBob games. Yeah, on a scale of good, bad, and mid, I would absolutely, definitely, undoubtedly, 100% say this is a good episode. Suds. As of the time that I'm recording this part of the video, I actually have a slight cold, which kind of makes this thematically the best day I could be reviewing this episode, because this is an episode about SpongeBob coming down with the Suds, which is basically the sponge version of a cold. Now, I'm someone who doesn't usually like episodes where the main character of a TV show isn't feeling good, because I feel like it's kind of an overused trope, and I don't usually find it entertaining watching characters feeling like crap because of them being sick, as it just kind of reminds me of how crappy I feel sometimes when I'm sick. But this episode is kind of different. This episode is very funny. It has a lot of good gags. I also appreciate how they actually showed us how SpongeBob got sick, because they didn't have to come up with a setup for that. They could have just had SpongeBob wake up and not feel good. I also liked the conflict between Patrick and Sandy. It's basically just two friends of SpongeBob fighting over who can help him feel better. And Patrick, I mean Dr. Patrick, obviously doesn't know anything, but he has good intentions in this episode, and the ending was pretty clever. This is definitely a good episode. Some would even say it's a pretty sick episode. And now, if you excuse me, I'm gonna have some soup and take a nap, so I'm feeling better when I review the next episode. Valentine's Day.
I defy you, Heartman!
This episode has a very nice opening with SpongeBob going around giving people gifts. And I love the animation in the scene where Sandy is fighting a bunch of scallops. But unfortunately, I've never been a big fan of this episode. Yeah, it does make sense why Patrick felt upset and left out, because it seems like his best friend SpongeBob didn't get him anything. But making him go on a total rampage, acting like a complete monster, was too foul. They made him too unlikable in this episode. And it might be a bit of a controversial opinion, but that's why I think this is a bad episode. The paper. Now, this episode is basically known for one thing, being one that hardly ever airs on TV, because of it being the sister episode to Valentine's Day, an episode that only typically airs around, well, Valentine's Day. And that's too bad, because this episode is actually very good. It's an example of something that the show can often do very well, which is making an entire episode over such a simple premise. SpongeBob finding many creative ways to have fun with a piece of paper. And something else I like about this episode is how, unlike the majority of Squidward episodes where SpongeBob is just annoying him for 11 minutes, Squidward basically spends the entire episode trying to convince himself that SpongeBob's antics do not seem fun. Arrgh. First, let me just say, I love how Mr. Krabs is characterized in this episode. To have the character who is typically just the boss character be shown as getting obsessed with something as silly as a board game, so much so that he tries to become a legit pirate and drags SpongeBob and Patrick along with him to find a treasure chest, made for a very fun and funny episode. Also, this episode, like basically almost every classic SpongeBob episode, has so many great moments. Mr. Krabs being sweaty, him hiring Patrick just so he can fire him, Patrick saying, "Oh, East? I thought you said Reest." The reveal that Mr. Krabs' treasure map is just SpongeBob's board game, and then the reveal that it actually is based on an actual treasure map, and then you got the Flying Dutchman's perfect cameo in the episode. This is a good episode. Rock bottom. In this one, we see SpongeBob wind up in rock bottom, a dark, spooky town outside of Bikini Bottom, after he and Patrick spend the day at Glove World and end up taking a different bus home than they should have. Instantly, what I gotta say is that this episode does an incredible job setting up the spooky atmosphere, with SpongeBob finding himself stranded in a town so alien to him, it feels like he's actually on another planet. And also how there isn't just a bunch of darkness around him, but advanced darkness. That was a very funny line in the episode, by the way. In fact, this episode has a handful of funny lines and gags. One of my favorites being Patrick saying, "Well, is leaving Bikini Bottom?" And you've also got SpongeBob spending basically the entire episode trying to catch a bus. A pretty funny conflict that I think many people would find very relatable. This is a good episode. Texas. I love Texas. The SpongeBob episodes, not the place. Though I don't have anything against people who live in Texas, I don't have anything against Texas. I'm just gonna keep digging myself into a hole. Anyways, this episode is basically about Sandy feeling homesick as she sings this sad country song that everyone in Bikini Bottom hears. And it's a simple song, but good. This episode has some very funny moments. My favorite being when SpongeBob says, "Hey Patrick, what am I now?" Patrick says, "Stupid?" And SpongeBob goes, "No, I'm Texas." This episode also has a great message as Sandy's friends make a surprise welcome home party for Sandy as they unsuccessfully try to capture some of the magic of Texas, but fail in a good meaning and wholesome way, leading Sandy to come to the realization that home isn't where you came from, it's where you are surrounded by people who care about you. This is a good episode. Walking Smile. This is a very entertaining episode. It focuses on SpongeBob and Plankton interacting with each other, which is almost always a fun dynamic. Case in point, the second SpongeBob movie. I love how this episode plays into the contrast between SpongeBob's happy-go-lucky, passive attitude and Plankton's attitude, which isn't even just passive-aggressive. I think that would be an understatement. This is a good episode.
Fools in April. As you might be able to tell by the title of it, this episode is centered around the holiday April Fool's Day, which also happens to be SpongeBob's favorite holiday. Something that we see annoys the out of Squidward, and that brings me to what is basically the episode's biggest strength, which is how great of a Squidward-centered episode it is. Throughout this episode, we see Squidward acting like his typical grumpy self as a response to SpongeBob's April Fool's Day shenanigans, but then Squidward actually gets up to his own shenanigans, but when he does, he gets too carried away, so much so that he feels the need to apologize to SpongeBob, which is incredibly difficult for him. And okay, when Squidward is trying to get the word sorry out of his mouth, there is a funny visual gag where his face turns into a donkey. And one of the problems many people have with the modern SpongeBob is all the visual gags in the new episodes. And then this discussion becomes a back and forth where some fans of modern SpongeBob will defend it, saying, well, classic SpongeBob had funny faces too. But the difference is that classic SpongeBob used over-the-top visual gags like funny faces sparingly, while modern SpongeBob, not always, but often overdoes it to the point where in some episodes you'll get 5 to 10 seconds of the characters just making funny faces, which gives off a similar vibe to a parent dangling a chain of keys in front of a toddler to make them laugh. Lazy and dumb humor. Even if the animation in a lot of modern SpongeBob episodes is very visually impressive, as the one and only cartoon post, and definitely not some other guy narrating this review as an early April Fool's joke, I think this is a good episode.
Neptune Spatula. This is the one where King Neptune challenges SpongeBob to a fry cook competition in front of a big crowd of people at the Poseidon. This episode is very funny, and I love how high the stakes are in it. And I also love this episode's message about quality versus quantity, a lesson I've had to be taught, multiple times. You see, King Neptune just uses magic to make a ton of Krabby Patties all at once, essentially pumping them out like a factory. Meanwhile, SpongeBob spends the same amount of time Neptune does making a boatload of patties, just making one Krabby Patty. The best Krabby Patty he can make. And guess whose Krabby Patties everyone likes better? SpongeBob's. Because when you put actual time and effort into something, people know. They can feel it. And when you don't put time and effort into what you are doing, it's obvious. Even if people won't know exactly what it is that they dislike about the thing that you are putting out, it will feel shallow. Anyways, this is a good episode. Hooky. In this episode, the Hooks come to town, and Mr. Krabs is shown frantically going around telling people to stay away from them, as he has the years of life experience. He already knows what they are, which makes sense for his character. Dude was even in the Navy at one point. Unlike SpongeBob, who we then see stumbling across the Hooks with with Patrick. And Patrick, in this episode, is not a very good influence on him. He's not malicious in it, though. He's just kind of the dumb friend who you shouldn't always go along with, which SpongeBob does, and in doing so, gets one of the deadly hooks attached to him. I like how this episode plays off of the contrast between the different influences SpongeBob has in his life. His unintelligent and kinda big kid like best friend Patrick, and then Mr. Krabs, who is older than SpongeBob and is the one he should have been listening to. This episode also has some pretty good jokes, and I like how it tells a creative story about what fishing would be like from the other side. It would not be clickbait if I said that this is a good episode. Pun intended. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2. This episode is already notable for being the first ever SpongeBob sequel episode. Modern SpongeBob has made quite a few of those, like Doodle Dimension and Squidward Box, just to name a couple. But at the time, with this being the first SpongeBob season, this had never happened before. In fact, it's kinda surprising they didn't even wait until season 2 before making a sequel to an episode. I guess the people making the show at the time just really loved Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. Don't get me wrong though, I do too. But is this one as good as the first Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode? In my opinion, it's actually even better. I like how we get to spend more time with Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, as SpongeBob basically spends the entire episode following them around and annoying them. The comedy is very good in this episode, and I love how much this episode expands on all the superhero stuff, with the introduction of the Invisible Boatmobile, which is basically a parody of Wonder Woman's Invisible Jet, and the conch signal. In fact, a little while ago, I made my own superhero-themed SpongeBob fan series, linked in the description below, which had a lot of Mermaid Man stuff in it, and I already put out all 3 seasons of it that I wanted to, and the series finale, but watching this episode made me wish I could go back and find a way to somehow utilize the conch signal in the series. Anyways, I also thought it was pretty neat and fitting for his character how throughout the episode, Mermaid Man is shown to actually get along with SpongeBob better than Barnacle Boy does. And it was a perfect ending to have SpongeBob save them from the dirty bubble after annoying them the entire episode, getting them to basically warm up to him and celebrate him as a hero. This is a good episode. Well guys, that was every episode of SpongeBob Season 1 reviewed. I began this video project 9 months ago, and although I am someone who grew up watching SpongeBob basically non-stop when I was a kid, almost every episode of the show that I've watched over the past half decade were episodes that I was only watching because I planned on making a YouTube video about them. And the episodes that I've seen over the past half decade just for the heck of it and not for a YouTube video, I could probably count on 2 hands, but going back and watching the entirety of Season 1 over the past 9 months has made me discover once again why I love SpongeBob and why it is, honestly, still my favorite show. From the comedy, to the characters, the atmosphere, and the surprisingly good messages some of the episodes actually have. And while, as you guys will see, when I make my video about my favorite SpongeBob episodes, not all of them are from Season 1. As a season, I think this is my favorite SpongeBob season, and mostly because of the very charming animation style it had that no other SpongeBob season will ever be able to copy. And now, given how long it took me to finish this project of mine, what's next for my channel? Am I gonna be reviewing every Season 2 episode? Well, maybe one day, but for now, I want to focus less on SpongeBob videos going forward and begin making some other videos I've been wanting to make for a while. Though I'm still gonna be making SpongeBob videos, but they also might not all be about classic episodes, by the way. This was a very fun project, but now that I'm done with it, I'm honestly pretty excited, because I'm basically now beginning a new chapter of my YouTube channel, and I hope you guys will join me.